love of Dorothy Day. It's more than just an interest, it's been a real influence, a deep influence in my life in the seminary and ever since then. She's one of the real heroes of mine. This little book, as you know, is available. It's by Patrick Jordan. I think he was in the Catholic Worker House. I'm not exactly sure where. But he's been a writer and Commonweal and other things. So it's a nice, a beautiful summary, well written, and it gives a lot of the very heart of Dorothy Day. The official biography, of course, is William Miller's Dorothy Day. It's a big thing. One of the things that came out recently, and I'm wading through it a bit, is the Diaries of Dorothy Day, Duty and Delight. She's such an excellent writer that it's just beautiful. She did Loaves and Fishes. These little meditations are things I carry with me wherever I go. Or the Dorothy Day book, little daily thoughts and meditations. She wrote on pilgrimage and love is a measure. And she also, I couldn't find my copy of it, of The Long Loneliness. Again, her first, almost like a confession of Augustine, really an unbelievable, an assessment, a witness to who she was and what she was before she really came into her own religious faith and deep religious belief. So they've asked me to give a little bit about myself. I'm Father Paul Milanowski. I've been a priest in the diocese for 52 years, retired now and living just down the street a ways. I grew up in this area. St. Andrews is my home parish and was my school until it was torn down. And so I grew up down in this neighborhood. My dad was an attorney. My mother took care of all of us 6 kids, and I don't know, I just had a lovely life. Maybe it was part of the roots in my family tree. I'm distantly related to Susan B. Anthony. My grandmother was Lydia Anthony, and I think Susan B., as best I can tell, would have been a great aunt to my grandmother. So anyway, maybe that's where it comes from, I don't know. I get in trouble though. I write letters like Dorothy Day, and I sometimes get a little bit too passionate over some causes, but that's the way it goes. Back in the 60s, mid-60s, I met Dorothy Day. Dorothy Day came to Grand Rapids, gave a talk at St. Stephen's, together with a number of very prominent people at the time, Catholics, and I think it was shortly after that my brother Yashu, a younger brother of mine, began a Catholic worker house right on Charles Street between Wealthy and Cherry Street, and he called it Hennessy House after Ammon Hennessy, a friend of Dorothy Day's, the one who lived. He was an unusual character. But anyway, after about 10 years of that, things became difficult, and it disappeared from Grand Rapids. I don't know if there's one right now. I think at one point Jeff Smith had a koinonia house right down in the neighborhood here. And I don't know if he still has one or not. Well, he's got a house, but I think he's got a family, so I'm not sure. But he's always a good person to go online and get his Facebook. He's always on the critical leading edge of things that are going on in Grand Rapids, and on hot button issues of social justice concerns. So that's a little bit about myself. In 1970, because of the war in Vietnam, I was doing a number of things of civil protest, tax resistance, draft counseling for young men that felt they had a conscientious objection to the draft or to the war. And I thought maybe I was going to be arrested or something, so I went to Canada for a year and studied. And that was nice. In London, Canada, I studied at Divine Word, and then shortly after that, they wound down the war in Vietnam. But then there were the wars in El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Guatemala, and so in 1985 to 1992, I took a little sabbatical of 7 years and lived in London, England. And in a parish, working in a parish in Bayswater, Notting Hill, right near Portobello Road. And it was the equivalent of a Catholic worker house. The front door was always open. It was really one of the most, I don't know how to put it exactly. There were an awful lot of street people. We called them men and women of the road. And in the parish, we served them sandwiches and tea every noon and in the evening. So it was very interesting. They had access to the house, also oftentimes access to our own rooms and anything that wasn't tied down. But it was a great experience, and my sole interest in going there was I just didn't want to be a participant in the hidden wars going on in El Salvador, Nicaragua, and Guatemala. And for those 7 years, I didn't pay taxes. I lived there. I lived very poorly, and I loved it. And it was a real introduction to living with an awful lot of West Indian people. There was a huge concentration of West Indian people in that part of the city. A lot of low income, very low income, and housing. And it was a difficult part of London. If you go to London, if you go on the Oxford Street, if you just go west, it becomes the Bayswater Road. And just 1 block north of that is not Harrods or not Rolls Royces in front of every house. So I really loved it. It really immersed me into the lives of some extremely poor people. And I got involved in Pax Christi, got involved with a marvelous woman, a very dear friend of Molly Lloyd, who was an Oxford graduate. She went to Tanzania, and she spent her whole life setting up a multicultural program in Dar es Salaam. And she was on a first name basis with Julius and Maria Nyerere. They would come frequently to London, stay at her house. Julius Nyerere, the first president of independent Tanzania, or Tanganyika. So anyway, I met many people like that. That's a little bit of my background. I don't know what else to say. I love swimming, sailing, skiing, reading, music, love and love poetry. That's about it. I love retirement. I love it. My favorite quotation is, "How blessed it is to do nothing and rest afterwards." So that's enough about me. Sorry, too much. We'll get on with the presentation. Really, this is more about Catholic worker movement, because Dorothy Day is inseparable from the Catholic worker, and the Catholic worker is all about Dorothy Day. So it's going to be pretty much about Catholic worker. But she was really the inspiration, very much the catalyst, very much the person who saw the dream that this friend of hers had, and then was able to put that into effect. So Dorothy Day, born just almost at the turn of the 20th century, November 8th, 1897, and died more recently, November 29th, 1980. She came into prominence during a very difficult time, during the stock market collapse, during the time of many people losing everything, soup lines, kitchens, soup kitchens, and in fact, that's what she and Peter Morin really began. So, Dorothy Day. Yep. Her social activism, her passion for justice, and for the cause of the oppressed were inspired by the gospel, were inspired by her faith, and were inspired by the example of the saints. She's an icon of the dream of social justice and the rights of persons. That was Pope Francis almost a year ago in the United States Congress. Isn't that amazing? Do you remember that? Pope Francis had 4 individuals that he recommended would be models for all Americans. Who were they?
Abraham Lincoln.
Huh?
Abraham Lincoln.
Abraham Lincoln, Martin Luther King, Dorothy Day,
Thomas Martin.
and Thomas Merton. God, you guys are good. I think, were any of you at the Ollie lecture Monday on Dorothy Day? You probably could give this lecture. I think so. Oh, I hear she was very good. Well, there they are. Abraham Lincoln, Dorothy Day, Thomas Merton, and Martin Luther King. So that's amazing, really. First time a pope has come out and expressed individuals as models for the nation. So who is Dorothy Day? I've got a 5-minute short here that I really like, and I hope you'll like it too. Now, where am I? Oops. Oh, it's down here. I'm sorry. That's right. Is that sound up high enough?
Her story is just such an incredible, beautiful story, and I think it's very important to share it.
Somebody put The Long Loneliness in my hands, Dorothy Day's memoir of growing up, the San Francisco earthquake, going to college, getting involved in the socialist movement, writers, leaving college after 2 years, going to New York, getting involved almost immediately in most exciting circles, radical, literary, journalistic. Of course, she was a very attractive woman. That must have helped. But she's only 19. And she was out, she was drinking with Eugene O'Neill.
She was arrested with the suffragettes in Washington and went to prison. She worked on radical journals, interviewed revolutionaries. Her friends were leftists of various kinds. But always there was this kind of hunger for something else.
Of course, there are stories in the late teens where she would be sort of on the town. She was saying she flung roses, but she would find herself at times at St. Joseph's Church in the West Village praying, And part of what really attracted her was the sacramentality of things, the sacramentals, like light, water, incense, oil, texture, bread, wine, those things. But also a sense that this was the church of the working poor.
There were also a lot of really painful, sorrowful times in her life. One that she never wrote about, but that was certainly very important, was an unhappy love affair that she had that resulted in her pregnancy and resulted in her having an abortion. This man she loved said he would leave her if she didn't have an abortion. She had the abortion, he left her anyway, and it was a terrible experience. Years later, she's living on Staten Island with a man she really loves. She has this overwhelming sense of happiness and kind of domesticity after all the strife and turmoil of her earlier life. She finds that she's pregnant, and she experiences this as an extraordinary feeling of grace, forgiveness, joy. And in her joy, her heart turns to God, and she decides, I want my daughter to be baptized, and that means I should be baptized as well. The man she was living with, whom she called her common-law husband, was a rational kind of guy, an agnostic, an anarchist. He wouldn't have anything to do with marriage or with the church. And so it meant separation from him and the love of her life. But anyway, she separated from him and then spent several years trying to figure out how to live out her life as a Catholic, but still holding on to that radical commitment to social justice and to the poor, and wondering how the two of these were put together. And it was 1932 that she went to, as a journalist, to cover a hunger march of the unemployed in Washington, D.C. that was organized by a lot of her old communist friends. And she found herself there on the sidewalk watching this parade of ragged men, and thought, now where are the Catholics, leading this march? But it came together for her when she returned from Washington and found this guy, Peter Morin, waiting for her. He'd heard about her through another Catholic editor, said, I think you have some ideas in common, and he'd been looking for someone to partner with, to set in motion a kind of program that he had. He was a great visionary, but he was not an activist, and he was a very impractical person. He said his job was to enunciate the ideas, but Dorothy was the person who kind of set it in motion. And the first thing he said was, we have to start a newspaper. Well, that appealed to her because she came from a newspaper background. This paper would promote the social teachings of the church. Secondly, there should be houses of hospitality that would provide, for the immediate needs of people, not through the impersonal agency of the state, but through personal commitment of Christians one for another. And then third, he wanted to start farming communes that would represent some kind of alternative to the industrial urban civilization.
Let's see. Oh, that's right. Okay. Where? Okay. Okay, so that's a nice little summary of Dorothy Day, and it just, it just touches the surface. And like I say, if you're more interested in it, this is available, I think, in the back or at the entrance. The Patrick Jordan, he had a little clip in there as well. I've given you something, I believe, as a handout, and there are also 30 things you don't know about Dorothy Day or may not have known that I'm going to give you as well. They mentioned Peter Morin, and her meeting with Peter Morin on the streets. He was born in France, and he was in the Christian Brothers for 7 or 8 years, and then left when he emigrated to Canada, and then he would come frequently to New York City. And he did almost everything. He worked on a farm, he worked in coal mines, he worked in steel mills, in dockyards. He was often on the streets, living on the streets, like a homeless person. And Dorothy felt that next to her conversion into the Catholic faith, meeting Peter Morin, was the experience of her life. And as the film said, he was not an easy person to get along with. He wanted to start a newspaper, and he had very clear ideas of what it was going to be. He wanted, in fact, to call it the Catholic Radical. And Dorothy Day said, I think we should call it and give it a name to whom it's aimed at, Catholic workers. So it became the Catholic Worker. And after the first edition, he decided that he didn't even want his name listed as a founder or an editor, but he contributed to it. But he still had this principle that he hung on to. So he was a Catholic social activist who, together with Dorothy Day, founded the Catholic Worker Movement. He expressed his ideas through short pieces of verse known by one of the later editors of the Catholic Worker. He called them easy essays. Here's one of them: the wisdom of giving. To give to the poor is to enable the poor to buy. To enable the poor to buy is to improve the market. To improve the market is to help business. To help business is to reduce unemployment. To reduce unemployment is to reduce crime. To reduce crime is to reduce taxation. So why not give to the poor? For business' sake, for humanity's sake, for God's sake. All these easy essays are like that. They're easy to read, they're very enjoyable. There's a truth there that just grabs you, and you can't argue about it. They're beautiful things. And there's a whole booklet of the easy essays that's available. So the Catholic Worker Movement, Dorothy Day, Peter Morin, is a collection of autonomous communities of Catholics and their associates. So it could be ecumenical. It included people that had no religion at all, but founded by Dorothy Day and Peter Morin here in the United States in 1933. The aim of the Catholic Worker Movement was to live in accordance with the justice and charity of Jesus Christ. One of its guiding principles is hospitality toward those on the margin of society, based on the principles of communitarianism and personalism. Okay, so it was community, but also the person was important, and respecting the person, no matter who they were, no matter how they were dressed, no matter what their circumstances were. It was very, very much personal. Today, the movement claims about 213 local Catholic worker communities, providing social services. Each house of hospitality, each Catholic worker house has its own unique identity. There are no two alike. They go about the work of social justice in their own way, suited to their local region and their local community. Are you familiar with any? Which ones?
In Rochester, Joe's.
Mm-hmm.
And I think there's at least two in Michigan. One in Saginaw, I think, is a farm.
Yeah.
And in Detroit, or near Detroit,
Yeah.
I think it's a house for the poor, or something.
Mhm.
I'm not exactly sure what that was.
Very good, yes.
Philadelphia, I
In
think.
Philadelphia, in New York, of course,
New York City.
Dorothy Day House, her day house, and then Mary's house, and then the farm. When I visited it back with my brother in about 66 or 67, I think it was just called Tivoli Farm,
Yeah.
because it was in Tivoli, New York. But now I think it's called Peter Morin Farm. Yeah, here are some of them that are in Michigan. Nope, I haven't gotten to them yet. Okay, so the Catholic Worker Movement, Peter Morin's insistence and Dorothy Day's immediate acceptance of it and enthusiasm for it was a newspaper a house of hospitality, a community farm, and then the fourth one, I don't know why I've got number 1 there, it should be 4, weekly roundtable discussions. And those are very interesting. And in the latest issue of the Catholic Worker, you can always find it in a box what the Friday night roundtable is going to be and who's the presenter, or what's the topic, or the event.
Yeah, see, we're doing a Michael Moore movie in October.
Mm-hmm. That's right, yeah.
Next.
Yeah.
Who attends the roundtable discussion?
Well, whoever wants to, they're open to anybody. Again, it's kind of a small gathering, I would say, and even the whole Catholic Worker movement is rather small in terms of the numbers and things. And these would be just, it could be the people that are, the recipients of the hospitality living in the house, or it could be the people that are the volunteers helping with the food or the distribution of clothes, or the people involved in organizing marches, protests, actions of one kind or another. So those are the 4 basic principles. Behind this is a nice, lovely Rita Kent thing. To be fully alive is to work for the common good. It doesn't come out so well, but. So here's another one of Peter Moran's little easy essays. Why the things are what they are. How the things would be if they were as they should be. And how a path can be made from the things as they are to the things as they should be. He was very gifted, a very simple man, and I guess not easy to live with, but he had very strong convictions. Oh. And for Dorothy Day, the biggest challenge of the day, in her day and in every age, is how to bring about a revolution of the heart, a revolution that has to start with each one of us. And Dorothy Day was very simple herself. When I met her, she came to Grand Rapids. I think she stayed at the Hennessy House, if I'm not correct. But that's so long ago. I don't know. I'm losing something. She's very down to earth, and when she spoke, very simple, very ordinary. So, the Catholic Worker newspaper, Peter Moran was determined that it get into the hands of people, so at the time of the stock market crash and the time of great difficulty, he said, let's make it a penny a copy, and a penny a copy is still there, price 1 cent. Any of you get it? Oh, great. I look forward to it each month. It just comes out once a month, and it's only about 8 pages. That's about all it ever has been. In the very depths of the Great Depression, this Catholic Worker newspaper made its debut with the first issue of 2,500 copies, and Dorothy Day and a few others hawked the paper right downtown New York in Union Square for a penny copy to the passerbys. So Dorothy Day would always have a column. Peter Moran would have his easy essays, and then they would have other either people, in-house people that were interested in something or other. Katie, how are you? Good to see you. Glad you came.
Sorry, we were at St. Monica's over at the
Oh, that's all right. So, the Catholic Worker, I really encourage you to purchase it, and you can just write Catholic Worker, New York, or you can call up at the information center or give me a call and I'll give you the address. So the Catholic Worker newspaper up and running. The next thing were houses of hospitality. And here's one in which they're just serving a meal to street people. Some of them may be residents there. That's always a difficulty, even in the house that we had. there were about 5 or 6 rooms, and usually you'd put a couple people to the room. But most of the people that were homeless had difficulties, and it was always a difficulty of sorting them out and keeping the place a community rather than just a collection of people with a psychosis or neurosis or something. I know one time I was called in, and one of the volunteers was a doctor from it's the hospital out there on
Metropolitan.
Mental Hospital.
Oh, Pine Rest.
Huh?
Pine Rest.
Pine Rest, sorry. It's been so long. So anyway, he was there and he says, we have this one gentleman, he's very psychotic, he's living under bushes, he's without food, without family, nothing at all. He really needs some therapy. He says, but we need some person to sign for him. So I signed for him, and about 8 months later I got a bill for $50,000.
Yeah.
I think at that time I was making $50 a month. He didn't tell me that that's what was going to happen, but and I never knew what really happened to him, but hopefully he got some help. So anyway, the Catholic worker movement, where did this come from? Oh, it's grounded in a firm belief in the God-given dignity of every human person. Again, personalism, and an understanding of God's gift of human dignity to everyone. So I said about 230 Catholic worker communities remain committed to nonviolence, voluntary poverty, prayer, and hospitality for the homeless, exiled, hungry, and forsaken. And Catholic workers continue to protest injustice, war, racism, and violence of all forms. I think that's pretty basic, although they're all very different, all totally unique, and no Catholic worker house is identical. Many of them do have again, with the principles of Dorothy and Peter, a newsletter, and those are very good as well. I think Saginaw issues one, I can't remember the name of it. Feel free to ask questions anytime at all.
Well, I'd like to know how you got out of paying that $50,000.
I left the country. No, I did go and meet with them, and I said I did not understand that that was part of it. They just needed a person. I was, very ill-informed about the matter, and I think at the time he was a therapist, and he told me that I wouldn't be incurring anything. So somehow they put it in there. I'm sure they had a budget for people who could not pay. Back in those days,
Write it off.
yeah.
Yeah, thank you. I'm glad you didn't get stuck in it.
So they just told you how big of a bullet you dodged.
Yeah, that's right. So these are the houses that I know of today. Day House in Detroit, Ibda House in Ypsilanti, St. Andrew's Catholic Worker House in Saginaw, and Peace House in Kalamazoo. And some of the houses may not even be set up to provide, hospitality in terms of giving people a long-term or short-term stay. The rectory that I was in had been a monastery for the Oblates of St. Charles, and so there were about 30 of these cells. They were about 16 feet tall and about 10 or 12 feet wide and about 20 feet long. And each one of them had a little fireplace in it, but those were all boarded up because you couldn't burn charcoal or wood any longer. In London, when I was there, they outlawed that because all the smog in London and the London fog. But in that house, we did put up an awful lot of people, and it was only after I was there a couple of years that I realized that there were a couple guys that were a couple. And even more that every weekend they would smoke something that smelled just terrible.
Excuse me, Father, I missed a little bit of your intro. So you were in a Catholic worker house in...
My brother started one, and I was with him in terms of finances, helping him purchase the house together with Chet Milanowski locally and a number of other families that did that. So we did start one. My brother started it. Like I
in
was,
London?
no, right here in Grand Rapids.
Oh, I'm sorry.
On
Okay.
Charles Street between Wealthy and Cherry Street.
Oh, okay.
The house is still there, but I don't know who owns it. Yeah,
Your brother is considered one of the founders of God's Kitchen.
that's
Now-
right.
Now, did that start after he started the Catholic Worker House?
That
or did-
started out of Catholic Worker House.
Okay.
They started cooking and preparing the soup and then bringing it down to the overpass underneath the expressway, the 131 expressway, until the police kicked them out and said you need a license. And then the second thing was, well, we don't issue licenses for serving outdoors. So, but then they moved to Capital Lunch and then to God's Kitchen, as you know it now. Thank
Oh,
you, yes.
excuse me, Father, so there was a Catholic worker house that your brother tried to start?
Yes.
I don't want to say the wrong thing.
Yeah,
But
he
it
and his,
didn't, I'm sorry, it didn't take off then? Or?
well, it existed for about 10 years, but
Oh.
then he and his wife separated,
Oh, I'm sorry.
and a number of things happened that it just, you know.
How long ago was that, Father?
That was 1966, 67,
Oh, okay, thank you,
till about 70, 72, 75.
thank you.
Is there any overall coordination of the?
There is
houses?
absolutely none, absolutely none.
They really are.
Anarchist. And Dorothy Day was adamant about not even making it a 501c. She did not want anything to do at all with taxes or internal revenue, and felt that, you know, the commitment was there to live, and she had this just simplicity, Franciscan simplicity, that it would be provided. Yes.
She was probably an avid fan of Thoreau's One Night in Jail. You familiar with it?
Yes. Very
There
much.
are some that are registered individually. as
There are some,
LLCs.
yeah, because there's no even a loose confederation. You really have to go, right now, on a couple websites, you can find the addresses of each one of these places. And I don't know, you know, even today, I wouldn't know how many of them are in existence. Most of them have, some of them started out in the 70s, a few in the 80s, a few, you know, within the last few years. There was somebody here in Grand Rapids, I think it was a student at Aquinas, had last fall talked about trying to institute a Catholic worker house in Grand Rapids. I never did meet with him. I tried to, but never did meet with him. Anybody interested? Anyone want to start one out? So the farms. Peter Moran's idea was that farms were important. I think this is probably a issue that came from Gandhi, a return to the earth. You know, it isn't. Most of the farms wouldn't be entirely self-sustaining, but they would help people who may not have had too much attachment to the land and too much to farm work to begin to understand an education process. And oftentimes it would be a source of nourishment for the hospitality that was served. When we were there, I know we worked on the farm for a while, and we worked in the kitchen as well, peeling potatoes and cutting up carrots, things like that. And I think there is something important, and Gandhi wasn't all that successful himself with the idea, and especially with returning to the spinning wheel and the loom, and simply producing and manufacturing the cloth or the thread, the material for the clothes that the community would wear. It's a nice idea, but it's not always easy. I know I visited another community in southern France. It's a little bit confusing. The community is called L'Arche. Okay, that's the French word for the Ark
Oh, yes.
of the Covenant or the Rainbow. And it's also the same word for Noah's Ark, L'Arche. And Lanza del Vasto, a very famous and prominent person, right after the Second World War, decided to develop communities of prayer, and they're almost like Benedictine communities of lay people, religious, you name it. And I visited there, and they really, I learned how to card wool, and then actually to spin thread out of that wool that I'd carded, and I didn't get any further than that. Arias felt that his communities were like Catholic Amish. And they're still in existence today, and Alonso del Vasto has written a number of things, and he was given a very special name by Mahatma Gandhi called Shantidas, which means Apostle of Peace. Yes?
When I think of L'Arche, the name that comes to mind is Jean Vanier.
That's right. That's why I say it's a bit confusing today, because L'Arche really is Jean Vanier's communities to assist those who are disabled. And today is the anniversary of Henry Nouwen, who was a very prominent theologian and speaker and writer, everything. And he spent his last 10 years at Daybreak L'Arche in Toronto. And he was the pastor. They asked him to be the pastor, but then he also took it on to simply care for one older gentleman that was severely handicapped, Adam. You can read about it in one of his books.
He said that saved his life.
Yeah, really it
Going
did.
there, that he literally was on the
Yeah.
verge of suicide
Yeah.
when he went there.
So thank you, that's what I meant. It's a bit confusing about the L'Arche, but I just simply meant to mention the Lanza del Vasto as another one of those movements within our church to kind of help people who need or want community to find it, and then to bring them back to some of the sources of life, or to the simpler things in life. Yeah, Mary?
Peter Marin also wanted to start farms because he believed that people needed work, that you need something that you're actually doing, not just thinking, but physical activity. But that the whole system of employment and wages, because it was so unjust, was kind of pointless, and it was much better just to go work on a farm and grow your own food.
Mm-hmm. Well, there was certainly that. It was at a time of the Depression, and a lot of people were unemployed, and there was, I think, as I understand that period, a general interest in returning to the farm. It was also that period of the Dust Bowl and the Grapes of Wrath period, just before that, and so it was kind of, in line with something that was already going on.
Gandhi probably got that from Tolstoy, because they were in
That's right,
correspondence with each other.
Yes, Katie.
Well, I just want to, in our Just Faith last year, we did look at the L'Arche, if you remember, do you remember? And I don't know if you do, Kate, but it was part of a film we saw, But I do want to mention today is International Day of Peace, maybe I already said
I
that.
didn't mention it yet, no. It is the World Day of Peace, International Day of Peace.
And I have to give a commercial on Sunday. There will be an interfaith program commemorating that at Marywood at 2 o'clock. And that's an interfaith program.
So, again, one of the favorite posters of the time was farms, not arms, weapons. Here are some of the, a few of the Catholic worker farms. I don't even know if you, well, I guess you can read that pretty good. There's even one in England, Old Oxbridge Road, West Hyde. I haven't been to that myself. Would love to go someday. So there are a few of them. The other thing, houses, the newspaper, houses of hospitality, the farms, and then the Catholic Worker weekly meetings. It was Peter Morin's recognition of the need for ongoing clarification of thought, to clarify what we're about and what are the important things in our world that we face or that we face personally, and to clarify that. In Spanish, what came up in the period of the 70s and 80s was the word, we don't have anything quite like it in English, conscienciación, and that means conscience formation, really developing a true conscience about right and wrong, and about justice and injustice, about war and peace, about all the issues, and that was very much part of liberation theology, was this development of conscience regarding poverty and wealth and all the issues I think you're familiar with. So Dorothy Day's strong commitment to Peter Morin's imperative continues even today. They continue that.
Bob,
Yeah,
have you ever been in any of those discussions,
I never was, no.
meetings? Just curious of what,
Yeah.
how they progressed or.
These are the ones that are in
Current issue.
this current issue of August and September. And as you can see, Manhattan Together, Building Power for Change, Eric Crusen's, the chairman dances, music and conversation. I don't know these people. Terry Rogers, Voices from Gaza, Cosecha, Gandhian Strike for Undocumented Immigrants, Where to Invade Next, the latest film by Michael Moore,
It's great.
John Seats, Religion, Photography and Propaganda in World War II, then a roundtable on the federal elections, Anarchism and the Catholic Worker. Yes,
That could be interesting.
looks good. I wish I could go.
Yeah.
You mentioned a moment ago liberation theology, which some people associate with socialism or communism.
Yeah.
What was her relationship to the official Catholic Church in New York at the time she was doing this? Did they
Well-
kind of leave her alone? Did they tell her, don't use the word Catholic, you're not associated with us? You know?
No, she and the people of that time were very much committed to Pope Leo XIII's encyclical, Rerum Novarum. And that was the first real social encyclical of any time. And in that it spelled out rights of workers, hours, wages, work conditions, the right to strike, to unionize, all that. So she was very much at that level with what Leo the 13th had initiated, I think, in, when was it? 1893. And it was just, coming across the ocean about that time. And we were fortunate enough to have Bishop House here in the Grand Rapids Diocese, who had taught precisely that theology of Catholic social workers in Milwaukee before he became a bishop. And then when he came here, guess what was right next to his chancery and right next to the St. Andrew's Cathedral? Was the office of the AFL and the CIO. We always said that Bishop Haas spent more time in those union offices than he did in his chancery.
He was a union man all the
He
way.
was very much,
Yep.
but a very gentle man, a very gentle.
Yeah.
So anarchism and communism, are something that's right there from the Acts of the Apostles. So they weren't insisted on that it be for everyone, but anarchy for us it is a very negative term, but for anarchists they simply believe that they do not want to be under the rule or the laws of anyone, and that they feel that in the human person there will be a respect for the other. So they're not really a law unto themselves, but the anarchist does not want to be ruled by a government that's corrupt, or by leaders that are corrupt, or by a system that is always in compromise. So, oftentimes she was labeled as a communist, and she did go through a period of socialism, and I don't know if there's any record of her actually being a card-carrying member, but she had sympathies in that thing. But when she became Catholic, then she realized that the roots of communism are found in the Acts of the Apostles. They shared everything in common. They brought it together, and to those in need, they provided need. To those who had, they provided their excess. So, and then the same thing is true of every religious order. It's a form of Christian communism. They hold things in common. They hold no personal ownership of whatever their buildings, their clothes, their shoes, whatever it is.
And that was the way it was called for
Yeah.
the first 250
Yeah.
years.
Yeah.
That's the way.
It didn't last long because
Constantine came around.
human nature got in the way and
Yeah.
original sin. Yes.
Yeah, but my understanding of anarchism, originally was, as you were saying, absence of law, but then of course there's those that acted violently, like the assassination of Garfield.
Yeah.
So that, anybody doing that,
Yeah, the whole beginning of the Second World War, the anarchists that killed Archduke Ferdinand.
Yep.
Yeah, so those are anarchists that, want to just tear down the whole system. And hers was by this revolution of the heart. And that's very much in keeping with our Catholic faith, yeah.
But she had difficulties with Cardinal Spellman.
I was just gonna say.
She had difficulties with Cardinal Spellman, and those may have been more, what was he? He was the chaplain of the military. And she had great problems with, war, armaments, weapons of war, and also the draft. So she was always in protest against those. And she probably, as much as anyone, was an influence in the Second Vatican Council, and especially the constitution of the Church in the modern world. I think very important. And again, she didn't do it by just by her life and by the things she was doing in a very small, almost microcosmic level, but she influenced an awful lot of writers, a lot of theologians, a lot of activists that came through the Catholic worker just in New York. Any other things on there? Yes.
Did you, I'm sorry that we're late, but did you mention the film? And that's film that, about her life? Yeah, I
Oh,
looked at,
Entertaining
I have it
Angels.
at home. What?
Entertaining Angels, is that the title?
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
No, I
And
didn't
did
mention that.
Paulus
Thank
make
you.
that? The
think so.
Paulus made it, I think,
Mhm.
yeah. And I think there are a couple of biographies, isn't there?
There are a number of biographies. There also is a woman who goes around the country and does a one-person theater piece on Dorothy Day. And she's quite good too.
Yeah,
See
that, I
that?
know who that is.
Yeah, she was
They were
here
at
at Linus a few years.
a house, in Chicago.
Yeah, I
by
saw
the
that
river.
years ago.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah.
A lot of, there's an awful lot on the internet of Dorothy Day, and you know, you can get things, interviews with her or her speaking. You get a sense of that on YouTube. Anybody into YouTube? Yes.
Was she friends with Merton?
She was friends of Merton, Thomas Merton, and her had a great series of letters. So, and he had been involved when he was still searching himself, came to the Catholic Worker and lived right in New York when he was going to college there in Columbia. Yeah, there's an awful lot of influence back and forth. So where are we? Okay, the roundtable discussions. Very important, and we do that today. Well, this is kind of like that. Kind of just getting an appreciation. Again, those roundtable discussions could also be a guest artist, a musician, a composer, a sculptor, a painter, you know, and they just covered almost everything. There was really a sense of appreciation for culture, for the arts, for history, for science. And those are reflected in these talks, especially in the New York Mary House. I don't know how they're done in other places, but I know what they're doing just from what they present each week, each month. Just a few more, and then we can take a break and come back. One of Dorothy Day's favorite quotes is, as the subtitle of the book here, Love in Action. And it's taken from Dostoevsky's famous book, The Brothers Karamazov. Love in action is a harsh and dreadful thing compared to love in dreams. So we can say a lot about love, but unless it's really found in everyday practical things, doesn't ring true. I like this. Somebody said that to understand the Catholic worker movement, you have to understand Dostoevsky and have read all his books, all his novels. And I think that's very true. That was one of her very favorite authors, and in these little books of quotes, she frequently has the day book, the meditations, or Dorothy Day quotations. Again, behind it is another one of Corita Kent's, you can't see it very well, but you can see this one out in the hallway there. Beautiful. I like this one of Corita Kent's. God's not dead, he's bread. They say the poor have it hard. Well, the hardest thing they have is us. I love, Corita Kent was influenced by Dorothy Day, as also was John August Swanson. Look, love is here to stay, and that's not enough. I just love Corita Kent. Do you know about Corita Kent? Some of you? Maybe not. She was a leading person in the advertising industry and graphic arts. And she did some of the most famous ones, I believe, for GE and what else? Westinghouse, I think.
And the love stamp.
Yeah, and the love stamp. And then she joined a religious community and then started teaching art and was a real influence in this kind of creative art back in the 60s and 70s and 80s. And she influenced John Swanson, whose serigraphs are out in the hallway here. And a serigraph is a printed work of art, but the printing for John takes 40, 50, 60, I think he's up to 83 now, different colors of one poster. So he's got 200 of these that he's going to have numbered and sell for, how much does he sell them for? Mucho?
A bit.
Yeah.
I just read last week on the anniversary of her death that she still holds the largest copyright print in existence, and it was on a billboard in Los Angeles, copyrighted.
Oh,
The biggest one ever.
Really?
Yeah.
no, it was a
That's what,
storage tank.
is a storage tank,
Yeah.
not a billboard?
Yeah.
Okay,
With a
storage
rainbow
tank.
over it.
Thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, she influenced a lot of us. She made these posters, again, for, for marches and protests of one kind or another. And be sure and see it at the exhibit of Sister Creta Kent and of John Swanson. John Swanson came here a couple of years ago and had a large exhibit in 4 or 5 different venues in town. And then he gave presentations, and those presentations are just unbelievable. The technique of printing these works of his, or not this one, but are really amazing, just astounding.
Yeah.
This is one famous one, let's work together, make a difference. And then this beautiful one of, this is St. Francis. There was, again, Francis of Assisi, Dorothy Day's all-time favorite saint. Again, because of simplicity, because of, being rooted in the earth and the theology of all creation. She just found that very enlivening and helpful. So John Swanson, again, you can't, this one is not here, right? No.
Right.
But Greg and Diane have a signed copy of his wedding feast. That's a beautiful one right here, just outside. So take a look at those, and the little pamphlet that the Catholic Information Center has put together is really a jewel. Whoever did that did a really nice job of all the artwork that's exhibited. I give credit to the Catholic Information Center for doing this art exhibit during Art Prize, because for one reason or another, the exhibit in Cathedral Square just couldn't carry on this year. I don't know what was behind it. But anyway, I give them credit for, at least, it's not Art Prize, but it is a beautiful exhibit of 2 of our very famous contemporary artists that I really like very much. So disregard all my words. I don't know who made that poster. I think that's good. There is a movement today to have Dorothy Day canonized, the official recognition of the Catholic Church, to make her one of the canonical saints. And I don't know if she's at the first level.
Yes.
Yes, she is a servant of God.
Yeah, servant of God, and then blessed, and then a saint. And that's always a difficulty. It was always a difficulty for me, especially when some the people that were canonized as saints. I don't know whether I can say it or not. Like
You're among friends.
Jose Maria Escriva, the founder of Opus Dei. I told the people when I was in the parish, I said, well, I think I believe more in the communion of saints than the canonization of saints.
Yeah, good.
Anyway, we'll take a break now, and yes, Dan.
One thought is, in this room, 2 years ago this spring, there was a woman by the name of Jananne Manternak.
Yeah.
And she was joined by John August Swanson. And they were sitting up there, and that videotape is on YouTube at the Catholic Information Center YouTube channel. And Jananne is a good friend of some of us here in the room, and she and her husband became collectors of John August Swanson. And the whole tape is great, but the last part of it is when John August Swanson comes alive, and he himself is speaking about his work and where he has been in his life and how he was influenced. So YouTube, Catholic Information Center, 2 years ago, was that when we had it, Paul?
2014.
2014. And Jananne Manternak, John August Swanson up there. And Jananne is talking about the life of John August Swanson. And so it's a phenomenal experience for you.
Okay, so we're ready for a break. I did print up a few of these things. Some people call it Hallmark cards.
In October, okay. Women's group, okay. Oh, I'm kind of frustrated with Mission Church Supply, because I said they would order it, I said, fine. Then they said, they had,
And somebody asked me, they see a little sweet here, and they said, well, what time do you go to bed? Oh, I usually
You
start
get something out of it?
yeah, 11:30, and I'm just over my early. I tell you, back to the, depends.
Yeah, for sure.
Well, it's nice that
Oh,
nice
I've
that
never
you
been
let us see them.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah.
right.
Was when
First,
about 3 in the
my
morning.
first cousin's
We
son.
have to go to bed.
Yeah.
Well, what time would you get up? Okay, thank you. Yeah, because.
Well, that's all my presentation. I'm really delighted to offer it. Maybe you have some comments, questions, or like I say, you probably experienced as much, if not more, than I have about Dorothy Day over the years. And I'd love to hear what some of your thoughts or comments are. Or if you have any questions. Yes?
I do, and I'm not to sound, well, I probably sound stupid, but the Catholic Worker House, I know I understood everything you said, but the house itself, when you start up a, I'm not saying I'm gonna do this, but what is the house itself then? Is that's the hospitality to feed people, or can you elaborate a little on the house?
The House of Hospitality, like I say, they're autonomous and they can be practically anything. I've got some friends in Nashville, Tennessee, and they go and help out once a week at the Catholic Worker House down their street. And they do not provide room, but they provide hospitality in terms of meals to homeless or street people, things like that. So it all depends on the nature of it. The ideal would be to form a community of people of, you know, some like-minded, like-interest things to develop that. One of the problems with my brother's house, the Hennessy house here in Grand Rapids, was that they were providing rooms for people, but not many of those people really had an interest in remaining there and forming a community. So it was just a place to crash for a day or a week or something, or just to escape from harassment by some authority of one kind. Yeah, Greg.
Your late brother Yashu was special. And, yeah, and to have died just prior to the recognition dinner that was given for all those who were crucial in founding God's Kitchen was a blow. But would you relate how your uncle had to arrest him?
Well, my brother and I were involved in a number of protests during the Vietnam War, and draft counseling and tax resistance. And one day my brother Yashu, that's a Polish name for John, and he was named after my Uncle John, who was an attorney like my dad, but then became a district attorney, and then a federal attorney, and finally a federal judge toward the end of his life. Well, he was up on the 4th floor of the federal building in his office, and my brother was laying down in front of the entryway. And my uncle had all these problems of conscience. How can I arrest my nephew and my godson and the one who's named after me? So I get a call from my dad, who got a call from his younger brother, John, and oh God, it was, you know, in the end he didn't decide to arrest him. That time he wasn't arrested. Somehow they finally got up and left, I guess, when the building closed. I don't know. I can't remember. So anyway, yes.
I read that Dorothy was very, very stern
with people in many ways, and that there was someone in the house in New York that a man, and he told her one time that he and his wife were separating for a time, and she said, "Get out," and she didn't want him there anymore because she was so strong about, you know, commitment and marriage and everything, and that she could be very strict about things, stern.
I think she was. She had a very strong personal discipline. That someone doesn't ring entirely true. I don't know if that. I never came across something like that. Because she accepted people at almost every level of, as far as I know. She always seemed rather stern and severe, but actually she was quite pleasant and enjoyable, and she had a sense of humor and a gift of conversation that usually in most of the videos of her look, you know, rather a very serious person, maybe even. I think she did have certain principles, though, in order to maintain a house of hospitality, not only feed people in the building, but also to house them and, you know, shelter them. I think it does take a certain amount. Again, my brother was not gifted at that. I wasn't either. And the pastor that I lived with in London was not at all gifted with those abilities. He couldn't be real strict and, you know, lay down the laws to, here are the house rules. You know, just like in any family, you really got to keep them. That's probably the difficulty. There's a certain kind of anarchy in a Catholic worker house. Everybody admits it.
There have been some other houses of hospitality. There's been one that's still going on in Pittsburgh that's moved locations for a while. That goes back to the 30s. There's a St. Joseph's House of Hospitality, which basically they do single room occupancy with lockable doors for the homeless, which solves some of the problems with some of the mentally ill and things like that. But they broke that group. That was somebody else from the anti-war movement later on, Charles Owen Rice, who broke with the Catholic workers over World War II because Dorothy Day opposed entering into World War II. And Charles Owen Rice, about, I don't know, I think in the 80s, finally said, you know, that was a bad thing to do. We should have.
She was right.
She was right. Yeah.
Craig.
How would you describe the relationship between her and Peter? Was there any attraction or ever? Or?
No, as far as I know, there never was. And Peter was very much a celibate all his life and lived a very solitary life. And again, are there any here that are not Catholic? Okay, I meant to ask Craig. Because the Catholic movement, especially with Dorothy Day and Peter Moran, were very much Catholic, you know. At least for Dorothy, to pray the office every day, to go to daily mass, to have a veneration, a real solid veneration of the saints, not just a syrupy sense of the saints, but a real sense of Catholicity at that time. And it was pretty strict. It was black and white back in the 30s, 40s, 50s.
Is it now?
Well, it's returning to that a
Yeah.
bit. I'm sorry to say. So they did have an unusual sense of piety and religiosity that I think people respected them for that. But it was of that period and of that time. Nothing wrong with that. I mean, they didn't have any other options. I mean, the liturgy was all in Latin. Things were very well defined as to, you know, who spoke on behalf of the church. It's said that she had a great relationship to priests and religious, to bishops and cardinals, but she was outspoken in confronting them on issues. So for the most part, she was on friendly terms, I think, even with Cardinal Spellman.
Yeah.
And who's the other one in Rome right now? She was good friends with him.
Law.
Cardinal Law. Yeah.
Oh.
But, you know, for all he had an attachment to Catholic worker and befriended them during his time there, so I guess.
Partly because they did the messy work.
That's right, yeah.
You don't have to get involved.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yes,
I just
Katie.
wanted to say something about the pacifist part that I think is so important, and that we had a very dear close friend, my husband and me, who was at the Catholic Worker for 8 years. His name was Bob Ludlow, and he had been a conscientious objector in the Second World War. And they had, what you had to do if you were a CO is that you did work somewhere, like you would be asked to work in a mental hospital or something like that.
Some kind of service.
And they, you know, were really adamant about that you just didn't, and even not even a medical person, if you were against war like that. And that fueled kind of the whole thing in the Vietnam War. And both my husband and I were draft counselors, and we lived out in the country, and it was kind of hard. You know, you have like my daughter's bluebird leader kind of screaming at me in church because the priest kind of set me up to talk about being a CO or a draft, a CO or a draft counselor. And I just think that's so important, and I feel sad I'm not hearing more about conscientious objection, because it's really important, because I think we kind of accept war as
It's
okay.
not as hot an issue because we don't have a draft.
Yeah,
Well,
but it is an issue for military personnel
Oh, yeah.
that really all of a sudden come to a realization that what they're asked to do in conscience they cannot do. So it's still an issue today. My brother was a CO, and for his time of involvement in the draft, he worked at St. Mary's Hospital. They finally let him go when he started a nurses union. My own experience as a draft counselor, all during those years, I spent a lot of time. I was at a parish just outside of town in Comstock Park, Holy Trinity, and the pastor was really good to me, let me do almost anything I felt like doing. So I felt in conscience he was doing it and I was doing it. The American Friends Service Committee had an office in town, and we would go and meet people. I counseled people, and in 1963, in the church document, the Vatican Council, the last document, Church in the Modern World, it stated explicitly that Catholics, that it recognized the right of Catholics to have conscientious objection to all war, or to war weapons, or limited war. So we went on that principle, that these young men that I was counseling, and I went to the draft board down the federal building downtown, I don't know, probably about 10 times, never won anything at all. They had to fulfill their quotas at that time. The draft was such, and even young people with the most serious objections were just forced. Most of them went off to Canada.
Yeah.
So I never had an experience of success with the draft board. Yes, Mary.
Well, just on a slightly lighter note, I was at my 50th high school reunion last month in central Pennsylvania, and somebody who used to be one of the cutest guys in the class, who definitely isn't anymore, came over to me and we talked for a little while, and he said, "How can you stand living in Grand Rapids? It's so conservative." And I'm just sitting here thinking, no, it's not.
You're right.
Not all of it, not all of it. We found the other people.
Yes,
One of my, I guess, earliest memories of the Vietnam War, speaking of the draft, was sitting in a friend's living room. Her brother was friends with my brother, and there were a couple of us, and then about 6 of these guys sitting there. As their lottery numbers were being called, I think it was on the TV, and watching the expressions on their faces as either relief because their numbers were high, or, you know, anxiety because they had low numbers. And it really, I've always remembered that. I was probably about 13 or 14 at the time.
Do you remember the people who went to court to get their birth dates changed?
No.
There were a few cases
I,
where you could, daylight savings time.
I did a birth
for a twin.
All you really needed in Pennsylvania was a judge to sign off on it. And I was doing a birth certificate study, and we worked at the central office in the state capitol, so we were there, and this lady said, yeah, it's really kind of weird. All these people are changing their birth dates, but it's only a day or two. So I said, and they're all men too, aren't they? Yeah, I don't know why. But it could be the difference between having, being 5 or 360.
Yeah.
And if you could come up with any sort of story that you could get a judge to buy, or the judge was a friend of the family, you could say, well, you're really born on May 1st, not April 30th.
That's interesting. I never heard that. Good. Yes.
Paul, when did you first encounter Dorothy Day? And the reason I asked that question because, I presume you were ordained, you were 25. And what happened in those first 25 years of your formation?
Well, I was in the seminary all that time.
I know that, but I mean, for the.
But I think I read The Long Lonely Journey in the seminary. I always told people that I learned most of my moral theology from John Steinbeck and Dorothy Day. Not bad, really.
Okay, that answers that answers.
Yeah. I was not into it. Our training in theology at that time was pre-Vatican II, and Bernard Herring's 2 books, The Law of Love, came out and just changed everything. Instead of looking at every single individual case as to whether it's right or wrong or good or bad, black or white, he comes along and says the whole law and all morality is based on that of love. And I mean, it's so obvious to us today, but at that time, it just shook the whole theological world. So that was coming out, we devoured Father Bernard Herring's books on that. And
So that would have been the 50s, right?
no, that was the early 60s, during the council, in fact, and a little bit before. I mean, his books came out in the 50s.
Yeah.
But I don't know when they were translated. Everything came over here a little bit later. Yeah, so conscientious objection, very much a part of Dorothy Day's efforts of social justice. Labor unions, very much important even today. All the things that are vital today. Nuclear disarmament, weapons, manufacturing of weapons. Here, again, Thomas Merton comes out with his book, Conjectures of a Guilty Bystander, and goes into things about Krupp manufacturing, about the building of the gas ovens and all things, and all those people were, condemned and convicted as war criminals. And Dorothy Day is saying, we're still doing the same thing. We justify it.
So did they.
And so did they. Yeah. Yes.
And the guilty bystander, thinking of Thoreau again, his night in jail, that was over not paying the poll tax, which was going to support the war against Mexico.
Right, yeah.
and also he was protesting slavery. He was part of, he knew Frederick Douglass.
That's right.
And, you know, and so he just didn't pay the tax, and he was actually disappointed that, I think it was an aunt that paid it for him. And it was
That's right, to get him out of jail, yeah.
Couldn't stand that.
So Dorothy Day was very much that, opposition to taxes in every form. And so they lived a very simple life so that they simply would not have to register and, you know, pay taxes. My brother was the same way. He had a print shop, but I think he had it in my mother's name. I suppose she paid the taxes, but in his conscience, he wasn't paying the taxes.
Have you heard of the Sheep Ranch, California? I guess that's supposed to be, I think, a whole town that, well, not a whole town. I mean, it's basically a farm in the desert, and they protest nuclear weapons.
Yeah.
And I don't know a whole lot else about it, but it seems to look, it looks like it's.
Well, there are a lot of groups. One is plowshares that have developed out of things. There's also War Resisters League. There are so many different groups. There's the School of the Americas protest going to the SOA that you mentioned. So there are all kinds of things. All you have to do is just simply open up the computer.
Here in Grand Rapids.
In Grand Rapids, yes. Katie and I belong to IGE, the Institute for Global Education. That's very much a resource for social justice and peace.
Of course, Father Robert Sirico down at Acton, he's got it on a global scale up. He does a lot of stuff about social and economic justice.
I'm not in agreement with Father Sirico. Back in the 60s, we had a debate on the justification of the war in Vietnam. And so we were and I guess we're still at odds in terms of the remedies for some of the, injustices in our world today.
Well, Pope Francis is implying there is no just war.
Yes, yeah, well, that's a whole new issue.
More interesting.
Yeah, but the just war principles were never enacted, so, I mean, they were always violated. People justified war for their own reasons, and so the principles that came out of Augustine and were refined in later years as principles to limit the negative effects of war. Well, I guess that all war has only negative effects.
Oh, sometimes somebody ends up with a lot of land.
Well, yeah, there's some victors, but, so anyway, that's an issue today, and there is a study group for that.
I recall hearing or reading somewhere that someone has proposed that one of the principles of the just war idea is that you're not using excessively destructive weapons, and it has been suggested that by that criterion there hasn't been a just war since the invention of the crossbow.
That's right. It's proportionality.
Yeah.
There's some proportionality with regard to the weapons and their effects upon that. Father Sirico.
Wow, you weren't allowed to use crossbows against Christians.
That's right, yeah.
Go shoot them Muslims, huh?
Father Sirico and some of his other people in that conservative vein wanted to eliminate the just war principles for the Gulf Wars, and saying that really we can't use them because we need principles to make war, to prevent wars, which is a strange thing. That here we're justified to actually go to war so that we'll prevent a war from happening.
Yeah, I thought we had all these nuclear weapons so that we wouldn't go to war again, right? Yeah, that's what.
Well, the time is getting close, so thank you very much.
Thank you.
If you need anything, give me a call, give the center a call. You can get my email.
Excellent,
If you need any more of those